very sweet to have your company, because you're here because you care about this. It's very sweet to have the company of a room of people for whom this is important. There are many rooms on the earth tonight full of people for whom it's not important. Do you know what I mean? So I really, really do appreciate that you're here, that you went to the trouble to get here, and that you go to the trouble in your lives to pay attention to what you are. Let me be able to see. Okay, I got it. So what all of the spiritual effort and wondering and longing is about comes down to knowing what you really are. It's very simple, really. That's the stripped down thing. Right? It's not to become something different from what you are. And maybe that makes haywire in the mind, because so much of the awareness in the spiritual life has to do with trying to bring about change in the self. Become more patient, more self-aware, less reactive, have better experiences, feel more at peace. It's all got to do with looking at how I am now, as I experience myself typically. Never mind what you might know about what you really are. I mean what life really feels like, day to day, moment to moment. So it all ends up being, in fact, what brings people to the spiritual life in the first place is often that they're suffering or unhappy or dissatisfied with themselves, and they see this as a way, as a corrective, as a solution. And that's the highest of ironies. Because that we seek, that we deeply are, has no interest whatever in any of them. But because that's the only problem is that we identify that personality, the one with the history and the preferences and the issues. We continually identify that as who we really are. And so as long as that sense is there, it wouldn't occur to us to do anything but to try to fix that person. When all along if we didn't identify that as who we are, there's no problem. But just as we're sitting here right now, in this moment, in this room, with this company, sense that you are here, just that you exist. Apart from all of the particulars, all of the characteristics and the history and memory, just see, if you get quiet and still inside and let your mind rest, can you tell that you exist? And how do you know that? What is that? What is it in you that knows, that can sense that you're here? What is it that's being aware? You can sense this. It's almost physical. And you don't have to resort to your mind to do it. You don't have to remember your name or what gender you are or anything that's ever happened to you in order to just simply know that you be. Right? Just sit with that for a minute. let there be generosity for whatever is occurring inside you right now, around the edges of that fundamental thing. So you're aware of being here, and in that direct encounter with your existence, you may sense physical sensation. You may be aware of thoughts in there. You may feel some residue from whatever you brought from your day. Whatever's there, let it be. By the very nature of our being alive and aware, we're attuned to what is right now, what's in the range of your awareness. And that includes what's occurring inside you and what's occurring around you that your senses can pick up. So just let be whatever is there. Don't wish it away or avoid it or try to manage it or name it. Just feel the huge space that's in you and that's in the universe in which all of these things are occurring. You are that space. Much bigger than you're used to thinking of yourself as being. Your body is full of space, in and around the molecules and the atoms. There's much more space there than there is anything solid or liquid. Let yourself rest from holding yourself. You don't have to hold yourself. You don't have to exert yourself. You're here. Aware. Just that. space around your body. How far does it go? And the space between thoughts. Let yourself rest. From all effort. When you have a moment, or maybe longer than a moment, of knowing what you are, and the experience of effort or of life as a problem briefly is gone. And then later you remember it. We often do. And usually when we remember those moments, it's from within the self that causes all the trouble. And what's noticeable is the contrast. And you reflect back on that moment, and it may be impossible to believe that it doesn't always, you don't always experience yourself as being that way. Because during those precious moments when we know what we are, there's no sense of time, there's no sense that it could ever be different from what it is, and yet later on, sure enough, we're back in the doo-doo again and thinking, how could that be? Well, you know, that's a really important question. How it could be is the thing that we need to pay attention to. Because the self that we normally think of ourselves as being operates in such a way that it convinces us of its reality, and it, you could say, distracts us or blocks access to the awareness of the other. If we didn't buy into the substance of it, if we weren't so devoted in caring for it and defending it and feeding it and keeping it in a good light and giving it fuel, all of that, we wouldn't lose the other. We would live as though we are space, awareness, still, moving through life in always comfortable with whatever life brings. So it's so important to ask yourself, not just mentally, but experientially, as you're actually living, when you feel yourself being deeply invested in what's going on, or feeling deeply gratified because something went well, or being reactive or defensive or any of that, you can either go for it, which is what we ordinarily do, and we look away. We know it's happening. We do know it's happening. You can either avert your eyes because it feels good to indulge righteous indignation. It feels good to get your dander up. It feels good to get angry. It feels good to feel proud of yourself, whatever's going on. You can either look away from it because that thing feels good, or you can look at it and learn something about, oh, this is how it works. This is what I do to keep it going. And that choice there, to look or to look away, is constantly with us. We can't go anywhere that choice isn't there with us. Now, all you have to do is hold a background awareness, and probably you're already doing this to some extent, of how often in your average hour you wish things were different from what they are. Just an ordinary moment. There's a discomfort with it, or being caught off guard, or wishing it would hurry up and get over with, or being irritated, or, I don't have to tell you. It happens many times every hour. How many hours are there in a life? And we look away. If you're here tonight, that means probably, or maybe you're just barely beginning, which is so wonderful. But chances are you've been noticing for a while how these things work. But, the noticing has to go deeper than it habitually goes. And by that I mean, we have to be absolutely willing to be vulnerable to ourselves. Really truthful. Really, really truthful. Not lazy. Look toward, when you feel yourself enjoying the drama, trashing somebody or gossiping, telling somebody, or feeling sorry for yourself. Many, many, many expressions this takes. It's not bad, it's just what the ego does. It's what it does. What do you expect it to do? You think it's going to suddenly become enlightened? Egos don't become enlightened. So, remember, if we weren't constantly maintaining this little bugger, we wouldn't suffer. Period. We would not suffer. So the maintainer, we are our own maintenance crews. Just constantly, it looks as though it's not possible for us to live without narrating our way through it. Assessing, telling a story about it, doing some kind of repair thing so I can feel okay about myself, even though I just made a fool of myself, or even though I just lost my job, or my partner just left me. There's always that coming in and it's automatic and it happens so fast. We tell ourselves, there's this undercurrent, this subconscious thing we tell ourselves, I can't help it, I can't help it. It's just the way it is, that's who I am, that's just, the fact that we tell ourselves that, that's what we have to look at. It's not true. We know, this whole thing is about already deeply knowing when the switch gets flipped in a person and all of a sudden they really do know what they are and it doesn't go away. The experience is, oh, I knew this all along. When you're in the presence of the truth, that in you that recognizes it as the truth, recognizes it because it already knows it deeply in the bones, knows it. This is significant. So therefore, when you're willing to know that you're looking away, or that you're going ahead and doing the egoic thing, that means that, if the willingness is there to always be truthful with yourself, always be real about what's functioning, you will, many more times than you have so far, recognize it's underway, and you will see, you'll learn, oh God, all we have to do, really, is learn about ourselves, our own mechanisms for keeping this thing going. It's a question of flooding your present moment machinery, whatever's going on, with simple, pure awareness and the willingness to be absolutely transparent to yourself. And here's the key, without judgment. Because the space that is our nature does not judge. So you can guarantee, it's like flashing neon lights, that if you're being judgmental about what you observe in yourself, it's the ego that's doing the judging. The ego that thinks it can fix itself. It's comical. So now you see, you go back to the idea that we want to be happy, we want to stop suffering, we want to wake up, we want to do better in any way at all that has nothing to do with awakening. And that seems to amount to, I have to change myself. You see how we do this? I have to change myself, or I have to change life. Life is occurring as it's occurring right now. It's already happening. It's here. The idea of disliking it or wishing it would be different is complete madness. It's already happening. So, so in the background of so much of our consciousness, of our what we put energy into, what we tell our friends about, what we talk about in therapy, why we drink, all of this stuff has something to do with trying to change myself. Meanwhile, the person that each of us appears to be, and that's had, life stuff happen, and really wants certain things really badly, and really fears other things strongly, and, that person is just doing the only thing a person can do on that level. We want to think that it must be possible to go from this person with issues, etc., the one I just described, somehow possible to be in that person and take certain steps, do certain things to leave itself behind, to go beyond itself, or to move from that identification by ordinary means of improvement, the way we usually think of working on ourselves, to be able to somehow go far enough with that and get to that perfection out there that everyone longs to be, to know. It will never happen. We want to think that if we can have just the right succession of thoughts, beliefs, practices, you know, like there's a connective, like this one leads to this one, to this one, to this one, and then pretty soon, finally, I'll get to the drop off the cliff one. It will never, never, never happen. It's only, I mean, the fact that we think that the mind could do that is the problem. We don't need a bunch of more better, gooder ideas, thoughts, beliefs. But while a lot of effort is misguided in this business that we're looking at, a lot of the strain, the self-flagellation, all of that is utterly misguided, and you can rest from it. Bless us, we need to rest. Because when we rest, when we really, really relax into what is and just let it be, then there's some possibility of feeling the space that's beyond it and within it, and that's what we really are. So while we can please relax the grim effort to get more evolved, we can instead replace it with an absolute pure willingness to see always whatever is here right now, what's functioning, what's going on in here, without judgment. It's a phenomenon. Being a person, and it's not being a person, it's identifying it as who I am. That's what each of us does. That is it's a scientific, bring a scientific curiosity to this thing that you seem to be. And see, how is it that I manage to keep convincing myself it's what I am? We all have that, even awake we have it. It's just that it no longer matters to us. It's just a way of being in the world. Right? Imagine what it would be like to go through a whole day, just one, without once getting irritated, without once feeling embarrassed, feeling sorry for yourself, feeling frustrated. Why do we do those things? The machinery that enables that kind of stuff to happen could not happen if we didn't first identify, that thing we did when we were sitting quietly, when you just feel that you be. When you identify what you are as something other than that, you're cooked. You will suffer. So having this alertness, instead of the try really hard, figure it out, and all that, do the practices and learn more things. I'm not saying practices are bad, but people tend to get identified with them and think that they're the answer to everything. Instead of working, trying so hard and feeling so bad about yourself all the time, instead, if you can carry this, it's like, remind yourself whenever you become conscious, remind yourself to just be alert. Be alert to how this thing functions, this person that we seem to be. Just observe it. And, any tendency to hide from yourself, to fear feelings, any reluctance to absolutely yield to be with what's occurring is going to keep you enslaved to this narrow sense of what you are. Conversely, no matter what's going on in there at the moment, if you let your awareness penetrate it, don't be afraid of yourself. This will not kill you. What will kill you is if you look away from it, because it's killing you every day already. We're afraid often to see truly what's going on, because we're so used to judging ourselves for one thing. We're so used to having this assessing mind on all the time, you know. How am I doing? How am I compared to this other person? How much longer do I have to get it right? You know, that whole thing. The only thing you've got to look at, to yield to allow and penetrate with your awareness is what's happening right now. And that will never stop being true. The mind wants to come in and say, no, but I have all these issues in my life, or no, I mean, this is a pattern I've been repeating over and over again. I've gotten into bad relationships, or over and over again I have the wrong kind of job, or but your sense of what you are when you sense yourself existing, that's all you've got. Literally, everything else is memory. Everything. The ego doesn't like that a bit. And that's part of the machinery that will always want to come in and inform the present moment. You know, there's something occurring, and the mind, it's very natural, it's automatic, it's part of the ego's equipment, the mind's equipment, to want to know, well, what does this say? What does this mean about me? What do I need to do about this? So, to fit it into a larger context, or to extend out beyond it, or all of that goes on is in the mind, and we don't actually have to do that. It's possible to live without doing that. The impulse to do it, to bring in mental lenses to look at experience through, the impulse has to do with identifying this thing as what we are. So see that when it's happening. It's not bad that it's happening. It's already happening. Forget good and bad. Really, God, it's just occurring. You're not doing better or worse. You're not a loser or a holy person. It's simply what's occurring. You don't have to do that in order to be in this moment of life, in order to be this moment of life. That's what we literally are. What's occurring in our awareness, whether it's in here, apparently inside, or apparently out there, what awareness is able to directly encounter right now is what you are. And that's all. It only feels like a panicky thing when you think about it. It's only when the ego gets hold of what just got said that it feels like, oh no. But do you see that when that occurs? That in us that knows that there's no problem doesn't respond that way to that. It's so important, so important to remember that the longed for thing is innate to you, is already here. It's capable of seeing. It's capable of seeing in an absolutely neutral way right now. It's capable of sensing itself as the space in which everything occurs. It's so important not to tell yourself, I'll never get that until I wake up. Do you see what you're doing? You're pushing yourself away. You're saying, I'm not that. I have to do something first to get there or to become that. And so when you do that, you deny yourself. You're turning away from a capacity you already have to see that you're not your egoic self. It's already available. And never mind if it doesn't show up on your schedule. You know, the mind, here's what I just said, and it says, oh no, but I go looking for it all the time. I wish it would come, or, I've never felt it, or it's not a reliable indicator of the truth, the thing that's saying that. You cannot trust it. It doesn't know anything but itself. Mm-hmm. So the mind and the ego can, when it goes looking for something, all it can see is more of itself. You don't expect it to do more than that. That's why this neutrality and being still is so important, because if you just get out of the way and you turn off the judging function, or at least see that it's operating, then there's some chance of the other letting itself be known. We get in its way. We make noise. We invest in this person that we seem to be as being who we really are, and it seems to matter so much. Sometimes you may have the experience of functioning as a person in an encounter with someone, or doing a task, or working, being at work, or something, and or doing something creative, and suddenly you become aware that even though you're functioning as a person, you're being a parent to your child, or a child to your parent, or whatever, you become aware that even though you are doing the kinds of things a person does, for that blessed moment, maybe it's already passed and you're just remembering it, but you weren't identified with it. You weren't, do you know what I'm saying? Have you had this? So, something in the ego says, it's not possible for me to, like, how would I get things done? People always say this, how would I get the electric bill paid and so on? It's madness. Of course you would. If it mattered to you, you still would do it. It's not that we can't function as people. God, that's what we're about. We're here to know what it feels like to live a life, being a person, and not identifying with that. God, that's what the incarnation is. That's what we're about. The goal isn't to end up sitting in silence and stillness and not laughing again, never enjoying the taste of food, never loving people, never getting anything done to make the world a better place. It's to feel what it is to do all of that without deeply investing in any of it, without it mattering anymore how things go. And yet we have all this love, all this intelligence and energy and creativity and our fine minds to bring to the stuff of our lives and the stuff of the world. So, part of the blessing of being willing to be really steadily alert of yourself and what's going on there is sometimes you'll discover that this is underway. You'll realize, especially when we're doing something that requires a lot of attention, like a physical task that maybe is dangerous. We have to really stay attentive, like racing a car or climbing a mountain. But it might just be something repetitive, like, hammering nails in a row on a board. You're doing construction, or knitting, or chopping vegetables. Somewhere in there, you might become aware that you're in a kind of a trance. You're doing the task, you're doing it perfectly well, your attention is alive and focused and alert, but there's nothing being invested just then in feeling good about yourself, thinking about the past or the future. You're just there doing something. God, you notice that. Notice what that's like. And don't we know we're alive then? Very often when the attention is on something, task, physical task, we're not actually paying attention to ourselves at all. We're just paying attention to the thing we're doing or the thing we're observing. Sometimes you come upon a terrible car accident and the same kind of experience is there. Suddenly you're very still inside. Even though the content of what you're perceiving is difficult and full of pain. And maybe you're called upon to bring all your resources to intervene or help or give comfort. But after such an experience, often you'll remember, you look back and realize how profoundly calm you were there, how utterly alive you felt. So, when you think about your life, when you think about yourself, it's the same thing. And you look at how you would like things to be different from what they are. Or you're reviewing what's happened so far and you're wondering how much more time do I have ahead of me to get things right or accomplish something, or realize that in order to pay attention to that, in order to give energy to that kind of reflection, it's necessary to be in your mind. You cannot do that kind of reflection without thinking. And then in that moment, having realized that that's what you're doing, never mind the content. The ego wants to say, oh no, but this is really important. Or, oh no, I could be really happy if this happened. It so doesn't matter what the content is. So just invite yourself to let the thought go into suspension just for a moment and just feel that you're here, or bring your awareness to your body or the environment and pay attention to the difference in, what part of you is operating between those two modes. That in us that is pure awareness is simply aware in a generous kind of way, as in, doesn't matter, it's got plenty of room for whatever it is taking in. There's no motion in it, there's no discomfort in it, it's pure, simple awareness. And when it senses itself, you register, I'm here, I exist, and it's enough. The other mode, when you're thinking about your life and yourself and how you'd like to be different, or how you'd like your circumstances maybe to be different, or all that kind of thing. I'm not talking about the practical stuff that's necessary to get someplace on time. I mean when you're reflecting on how your life feels to you. All of that requires the mind. The ego is very busy because it matters to the ego what you make of your life, what you make of yourself. So when you pay attention to what that feels like, it's uncomfortable often. There's movement, there's desire in it, there's investment in it. And realize that you don't actually have to do that in order to live a good life. Somehow life just keeps happening. Life will just keep happening as long as it does, whether we're thinking about life or not. Does anybody want to ask anything or say anything or reflect? Yes.
I struggle a little with clearing my mind and then feeling bored. And is it just ego resistance? Like I can kind of stop thinking for a while and just focus on washing the dishes, and then I guess I have a thought. This isn't enough.
You said you struggle with clearing your mind. So you mean you can decide to clear your mind and it clears?
A little.
And then there's antsiness or boredom or dissatisfaction or.
If not thinking about a story or something,
Yeah.
yeah.
So when that, so say your mind's been quiet and then that kind of thing starts up. The only thing to do there is to see that that's there. Do you know what I mean? The thought that somehow there's a right way to be, there's a better way to be, to have a clear mind, is the troublemaker. You know?
But I mean, I guess when I'm trying to do what you're saying, to just notice. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So if there's restlessness where you notice that there's a thought that says, well, isn't there more than this? Can we
Yeah,
have a
where's
little
bliss?
excitement?
Yeah.
Yeah, or the bliss. Just see that you're having that thought. I mean, that's just a thought. It's like there's no, what if there were no standard or no goal or no kind of ideal about the desirable condition or the, you know what I mean? It's like that thing that does that, that looks at the momentary experience with that kind of eye is part of the machinery that's, so there's nothing to do. There's never anything to do to change what's going on, to just see what's there.
Could you talk a little bit about time and the way that time, we perceive time, and the way time, I suppose, enables us to suffer?
Do you hear? Time doesn't exist except when we think. Right? If moment to moment the awareness is on the immediate scene, what you're doing or what you're experiencing or sensing in your body, and there's not reference to what's coming next. I mean, not talking about in a practical way, but just the energy of anticipating or worrying or hoping or revisiting something that happened earlier today. If all the awareness is just on the immediate and there's no resistance of the immediate, there's no place for suffering to get a toehold. It's only when the mind starts either making a story about the immediate thing or remembering or projecting ahead that pain can start up. Because it's the business of the mind. I mean, the mind is really important to the ego because part of the way we get our sense of self and keep it going is by constantly looking forward and back and looking at the kind of the big picture, the idea we have of ourselves and all that. I'm the kind of person who, and all of that. So we don't experience time. It doesn't even occur to us that it's there until the thinker starts. So they're all intertwined. The sense of self, I'm going to actually talk about this more tomorrow. The sense of self depends upon time. You want to say more?
Well, I'm thinking when you say that, history, or the story of what came before in my life, as though I own it. And it's up to now, and that is what makes me now. But history means time.
Yeah. I mean, in some way, we are obviously the result of what's happened. But it sort of doesn't matter how we got to be the way we are. We want it to matter very much. But we are the way we are, regardless of whether we can, follow a string back to how we got there. Because we don't let the past be the past, because we keep revisiting it, it has a quality of being present. The mind visualizes or, revisits a story about something in this morning or in fourth grade. Doesn't matter when, but sometime before now. And our minds are so good at convincing us of the reality of their pictures or stories that we put what the mind is bringing into focus right now on the same plane of the real as what's literally immediately real right now. And so the impression is that all of the past coexists potentially. All of our rememberable past coexists potentially with the present. And people that have what Eckhart calls huge pain bodies know all about that. So when the past is really allowed to be the past, we're free of it. And again, that's that deeper looking than we're usually willing to give energy to. We often deliberately we do hold to the past. We don't want to put it down, even though we can see that it's causing us misery, because it's our sense of ourselves. And so if there's identification with something from a difficult past, and we all have that to one degree or another, it takes such spiritual courage to see that it is not holding on to me, I am holding on to it. And if I was wronged in some way, if I suffered at the hands of someone else, or terrible circumstances, or whatever, but especially if it was deliberate, I think. The tendency to cling to that as who I really am is ferocious. There's something that says, if I was wronged, if I suffered that way, the least I can get out of it is an identity. Get out of the... And that's the last thing we want to tell ourselves. We do not want to look at that. But if we could look at it non-judgmentally, we might be able to become free of the past from it. And even if we can't, at least to see I'm doing this, at least to see I do derive a sense of self from this. It does give me a sense of being here, being in the world, and it's like a retaliatory thing to the force of the wrong thing that was done, or the bad thing that was suffered. There's something in it that it's like settling, balancing things out. And so there's time, the mind and the ego, it's like if you suddenly lost your memory and you didn't know anymore about what had happened to you, how would that change who you are? Would you know you're here if you lost all your memory? If suddenly amnesia took it all away, would you still be able to tell you exist? We carry our past. It's massively heavy. Massively heavy. And I'll be right there. I just want to say one more thing. I'll talk more about this tomorrow, I think, but the ability to not take on new constant residue from what's happening now, which this now will one day be the past. Really soon it will be. Right now. Okay. So here we are, we've done what we've done. We've come through our lives and we've been affected the way we've been affected, and we've clung to the past and our identities as we have. But hey, we're still here. Life's still happening. So do we have to keep doing that same thing? When we're wounded and the ego is doing its thing, do we have to take it on and carry it and add another tumor to the mess of tumors we've already grown for ourselves, and with a bag of rocks in your backpack, however you want to? No. And the key to it is when something happens that wounds, that subtly or maybe in a bigger way brings pain. Again, it's the pain is to the sense of egoic self. The spaciousness that you deeply are has no concern for anything that happens to your poor ego. So when something hurts, but we do largely identify with our egos. And so we feel wounded, we feel threatened, we feel undermined, we feel unnerved all the time. So when something comes at you, you experience it that way. If you just, instead of rushing up into your head to make it okay, or to come up with a story about it, or escape, or get mad, or round up your friends to be supportive, or whatever it is, if you can just hold still and let the thing hurt, like it's a little knife going into you, stay with that primary thing. Feel it. Never mind if it should or shouldn't have happened. Never mind how you can make it better. That's all in the head, and that's where the trouble starts. That's where the emotional burden that we all carry now came from. Lifelong pattern of not being willing to stay with that primary, the feeling of, oh my God, I just made an ass of myself, or oh my God, my heart is going to break. Let your bloody heart break. And then you know what? It'll break really hard for a few minutes, or an hour, or a day, and then you move on and you're not carrying it. What makes us carry that stuff and makes us have to go into therapy for the umpteenth time, or get in the wrong relationship all over again so you can take it out on somebody for something somebody 20 years ago did to you. We don't have to do that. The reason that happens is because we are afraid of ourselves. We're afraid to feel the initial thing. We can't stand not to take refuge in our minds to fix it. It's the mind that generates the trouble. It stays with us forever. So when we can't let the past be the past, it's because we were reluctant, afraid, whatever, to stay with that original feeling without regard for what the mind might do with it. The willingness to do that lets you be in your life. Really be in it. Be present with whatever's happening. And then when the next thing comes, you're present with that. And you're not stuck back in 10 minutes ago or 50 years ago. So you don't have to keep doing what you've been doing before. Truly. But you've got to be aware. You have to be willing to feel the thing and go, oh, like as soon as you get defensive, before you felt the need to get defensive, there's something prior to that. Back up. Stop yourself and think, okay, what is the offense I felt? Where did I feel threatened during the night? And let it be. Never mind the motive of the person who said or did the thing. That's all in the mind. It doesn't matter whether you were wrong. What matters is, what are you feeling? And can you stay with it? Can you be alive right now in the feeling? It's a bodied thing, that kind of feeling. And then when you let it do its thing. It's like when you get when you shiver because you're cold. Your body needs to shiver to get the warmth, to adjust the temperature back. It's a physiological thing. Or you get shocked, or and it's going to hurt for a few seconds. Okay, it spends itself, and that doesn't hurt anymore. You burn yourself, and it hurts for however long. It's like that. So when something comes at you in a human feeling kind of way, not just a physical way, it's got its little life it's got to have if you let it. And letting it means don't go up in your head. If you start to go up in your head, realize you're doing it, you're trying to protect yourself, just go back into the feeling. And the next thing you know, it's over. You don't even remember it later. You don't bear a grudge. You don't feel like you've got to get back at somebody, or tell your friend about it, or buy 17 self-help books to make yourself feel better about yourself. Really. And then you know you're alive. Somebody here a few minutes ago wanted to say, yeah.
Yeah, I believe that we do carry the past with us. And I believe there are certain traumas that occur, where you can't just sit in a moment and say I'm alive and I'm in my feeling and I'm not in my head. What about a woman who's raped by her father? And not raped just once, but raped for years. That's a chronic wrong. You say, forget that you were wronged. I think that it's important if one is wronged.
Important to what?
I think it's important, what I'm hearing is that you're dismissing that. Forget that you were wronged. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think it's very important to acknowledge that you were wronged.
And so say more. Acknowledge that you were wronged, and then what happens?
And I think that you can't just sit in a moment and, be in that wrong feeling, because I think some traumas aren't gonna go away just because you feel that you were able to sit in the feeling for a few minutes or a few hours, because some traumas are so devastating and chronic. Some abuse is so chronic that I don't think a simple exercise like that is gonna even touch it.
It's not about trying to make, it's not about trying to make those episodes when it comes, it's, what is it, so I was wrong, that understanding, and clearly, objectively, that's true. It's what does it feel like when the sensation of fear, pain, however it comes in the body right now, what is it to feel that, which is clearly a result of something in the past, but it's happening now. What is it to feel that in a bodied way, without the mental overlay of the story that I was wrong? The story is there to cope, it's there to somehow make it manageable, or to not have to maybe really deeply feel the thing as it's coming that's physical and visceral.
But I think the story is real. It's as real as the feelings that the person has. It's as real as the devastation, as the depression, as the anxiety, as the fear, as the sadness, as the chronic losses. I think the story and all of that are all one. In fact, those feelings are part of the story.
And so, is a person in that situation, will that person always need to have the story?
I think the story
Is there a
will
time
always be there.
Beyond it?
I think the story will always be there.
And will they ever stop suffering because of their history?
I think that perhaps it's possible to suffer to a lesser degree, but I think there'll always be some pain and suffering from that. I'll give you an example. I was someone who was abused by my father for many, many, many years. And I think that I will always have that story. I will always feel that pain. Maybe as the years go on with really excellent therapy and some healing, that pain will diminish. But I think I'll always have that story. that is my past. I will always carry my past with me. My past is a part of me. I'm not someone who didn't experience that. I am someone who experienced that.
Mhm.
And I don't think that I can just, say that the story didn't happen.
It's not at all about whether it happened or didn't. Of course, what happened, happened. It has to do with the sense of who I am, who you are. Is there some sense of who you are that isn't that? Is there something, is there space around that thing that occurred? Or that space around when you think of have the thought, or when anybody does, of something that happened to them? Is it possible to get, to have that there and to realize that there's something that isn't that also feels like who you are? And there may be a reluctance to invite that possibility, because there is a sense of self that very much has to do with that horrible stuff.
What about the advice to write through an experience, like say she's describing any traumatic experience that may have happened many years ago, but to write about it, express it, even perhaps put in a book form of some sort to get rid of it or to heal it. It was suggested to me to do that, and I had this tremendous resistance to go back and go through the whole thing again. I like what you're saying, but I'm just wondering what you would say about this.
To me, I'm not going to say I think that's a good idea or not. To me,
Right.
what comes up for me and when you say that is, if a person feels moved, if it's a means to an end kind of thing, say, well, I'd like to be relieved of X, and maybe a way to do that would be to write about it, and then that would achieve getting, I think that's a primrose path.
Primrose path.
It is.
Meaning?
Well, it's a setup. It's a doing something, instead of doing something for its own sake, because you're really moved to or you love to write, you may find that if you write about it, to your surprise perhaps, something surprising will happen. There will be a discovery made that wasn't made before. Maybe there will be release from some, we don't know, but to say, I'm gonna do this so that's a setup. It's a saying, here I am, this is what I'm experiencing. I'd like to be different from what I am. So, do you see what I'm saying? Instead maybe just, to observe, this is how I feel, this is what happened, this is where I am with it right now at this moment in my life. And then just see what happens.
Be with it.
Yeah. And if you feel moved to write, but if you write, so that anything, that's not gonna happen. Something else will happen then. It might be wonderful, you don't know. Yeah. In the back.
We carry from our past things we enjoy. Is the suggestion that those pleasant memories are as much a trap or a burden as the negative?
Oh, that's wonderful. You mean like revisiting a pleasant memory?
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily a trap. The trap is to try to live in it. I think, one of the wonderful things about our minds is that we can remember. And we can go over, we can, kind of re-enter a scene and we can sort of have pleasure. This is part of what writers do, I think. They write so they can relive things. So to me, it's one thing to enjoy it and know in the background the whole time that it's a memory and it's not occurring now. It's another thing to live in the past as a replacement for being here now. And I think we can really be aware of, of what we're doing. So to me, it's not what we're doing, it's whether we're invested in it. you see what I'm saying, the difference? So some people will go back to the past because those were the good old days and they don't like how life is now. They'll revisit the fun time or the good life circumstances or childhood or whatever when things were good. And they'll go back and kind of re-enter that in their minds as solace or escape from the unpleasant present. That's one thing. It's another thing to just get pleasure out of revisiting something because we are able to remember. And I think, again, if you're truthful with yourself, you'll know what you're doing. It can be a trap. I mean, I used to live in the past all the time. I know exactly what that feels like. But I think we know what kind of energy is happening there. And what is the orientation toward the present? Yes.
I understand even experientially what you're talking about. This particular machinery has experienced a lot of trauma, both caused by other people and self-caused by my own behavior. And I feel free of those stories. I feel free of the suffering of those stories as I go through. They don't weigh on me like they used to. They don't, I don't identify with them. At the same time, I guess I'm wondering if there might be some identification, because if a thought arises, say about the death of my son when he was 10, and where I was at the time, and there's a certain sadness. It's not like I'm trying to go there or I'm dwelling on it, or I'm needing to tell the story. It's more like, the thought arises, and it's kind of like, oh, it still has a kind of a charge to it, I notice, But, and while I don't experience being caught in the story most of the time, every once in a while I see it's happening, it just kind of arises, and I'm able to tune into, that's not who I am, that's not who I was really, that's the game that was being played, But still there's something almost in the body, that still contracts a bit, So it's not total freedom, but it's certainly so much more freedom than I used to experience. But I want to just ask about, it seems to me that I can get, how to work with the mind, how to let go of the mind, and to be present and aware, and know that that's not who I am, and there's something more, and I am something more. But it seems to me there's still a sense of separate self stored in the body, at the cellular level. That the traumas have affected our bodies, And that it's one thing to be able to say, even deal with the psychological aspect of it, there's another to kind of, it's another to release the body, if you will. So I just wondered if you could speak to that piece of it.
Well, we are physical. I mean, we do keep being physical. In the case of a son who died, and that kind of revisiting that sort of thing, when we remember something like that, isn't it, what's happening there is love, isn't it? I mean, that, some of the things that we kind of touch that are in the body, say, or in the form of memory, or however, wherever you locate it, or wherever you experience it, when we go back to something from the past, something in us wants to remember when love was a living, active thing. I don't think it's necessarily that there's identification going on. It's like revisiting who we were then, or who, I don't know.
Yeah, but I'm getting it. This, as you say, I'm getting more in touch with what you're speaking about, because it's kind of like there's a compassion even for the person that I was then. You know what I'm saying? The ignorance. the lack of awakeness, awareness or whatever, the lack of contact with awareness, the total identification with my Mishikash at the time, you know what I'm saying? So that there's a sadness for the whole constellation, the me and family, like there's a kind of a sadness, but also, I guess a love too, kind of like a caring, caring sadness.
Whatever's happening, I mean, the main thing about it is that it's happening. Not that we have to do something with it or understand it or change it, just allow it. And the whole urge to get beyond something or understand it or, that's part of what keeps pain happening.
Yeah, I don't feel the urge to get around it. I'm just kind of wondering whether that's just, whether that's still within the context of what you're speaking of, in the sense of being free of it, it's arising, really free of it,
To me, there's a mental thing going on there.
Yeah.
It's like, even as I try to consider it, I mean, all I come up with is just let it be what it is. I think we can only go so far with,
Right.
it's all just blah, blah, blah after a while,
Yeah.
really, truly, Yes.
I like to now in my practice ask the question, am I using this to rob myself of enjoying what I am? And I specifically don't use a who I am, because for me that brings ego in that word here. What I am, that spacious awareness, which isn't a term I use as like an intellectualization, but something having been directly experienced. And so when I find I'm clinging to something that is making it such that the reality of what I am seems inaccessible in the moment, I just observe rather than try to do better, and maybe try to reach for that awareness, to just recognize I am choosing in this moment to rob myself of the enjoyment of what I am right now. And that's okay. Let me just be with that. And then I find it falls off. A key thing for my practice has been to not try to be better than myself. That was, for many years, sort of knowing what the spiritual remedy is and like applying it to me. It was a very hateful practice. That's what I witnessed in myself. That it was better to just be present with whatever was happening, even if it was clearly the non-spiritual thing I was doing, that was the moment of union. Because ultimately that's what the true self is. It's in a state of union rather than a state of separation. So I'm present for that decision in that moment, that I think this thing is so important and so valuable that it is more important and valuable than what I am, which is actually joy. I'm just going to sit with that.
So, and while that's going on, there's no judgment? There's no sense of which was preferable?
Many, many years it took to have that judgment fall off. So if any judgment tries, somehow something happened where the judging function isn't this quick thing anymore. It's, I feel something starting to rise to do it, and then it's almost like I don't have the effort to go there anymore. I feel that motion, it's a pounce in the mind. So I would say maybe something attempts, and then it's, oh yeah, we don't do that.
It was his heart.
There's nothing there. Yeah, yeah. And there's not enough interest or momentum to go do that thing, because it's been discovered viscerally to bear no fruit
Yeah.
and to be a hopeless path.
We've been here before.
Yeah.
we've been here 52 billion times.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This may kind of lead from the last question. I have two slightly more evolved ways of functioning than just being my ego.
Uh-huh.
And one is witnessing what's happening and kind of dissecting, like you were talking about, in terms of, okay, this is happening and I'm watching this and this is what my ego is doing, kind of starting to name the mechanics of what's happening. And the other is just when I'm living life, walking down the street or doing work or whatever, and just being in awareness without any stories. And I'm wondering when each of those has a role and what their purpose, you know, if there's an intelligent way to use either one of those.
It doesn't have an answer.
Okay.
It's more the asking of the question that's worth paying attention
Okay.
to. It's as if we have some kind of, as if we could have a background posture of, you know, sort of a readiness to choose method A or method B and to apply it in a given moment. I mean, by the time you become aware, self-aware, one of them is probably already underway. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're not in this like neutral zone, you know, where we're, you know, like we're neutral in a car and the gears are ready to go in. We're not, if there is such a thing, it would not occur to us from that place to do anything, to apply a method, to choose one method or another. So it's like, they both just occur, they just happen when they do. And so, nothing to do but let them happen. And see, you know, maybe just stay aware. What do you see? What comes? What does the body feel like? But, you know, the wish to know, or, you know, to know.
Yeah, I'm getting in my head.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you have a thought, you know, in an actual life moment, which of these should I be doing? Just see that you're having that thought. That's the only useful thing to do with it, rather than trying to decide which way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We want a method.
I listened to one of your audios on the internet before I came, and you spoke about, this may be relevant to what we're talking about, but you spoke about nature and how there's no torment in nature. Nature goes through a lot and just experiences it and kind of lets it be. No anger, which would amplify whatever is going on. I don't know if that's relevant to what we're saying, but feels like it might be.
You mean that nature just is what it is?
It is what it is, and experiences tremendous storms and ravaging. It just accepts it.
Yeah, there's nothing in it that's separate from it in order to decide whether it's okay or not. Something in us is like that.
Right.
And the reason we feel at peace or home in nature is that something in us is that way too and recognizes itself there. It's like when a tree gets cut down, there's always some tender-hearted human nearby whose heart is going to break because the tree got. But is the tree? I know somebody's going to jump on me for this, but is the tree thinking, oh damn? I cannot know what the tree is. But I'd be really surprised if it turned out that the tree was feeling anger at the guy with the saw. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to keep trees. I'm just saying there's something, if I'm being cut down, what is it to just recognize that the thing is happening?
I have two things I wanted to inquire about. First, it seems like humans are somewhat attached to suffering, whereas animals aren't. And the second is, were speaking about choice before, but if there's non-duality, is there a choice? So I'm confused. I've always been confused.
What is it about the animals part that you?
Well, it
that you
seems
say?
like humans and there were several people mentioning about past experiences. And I think we've all suffered through various things. And it seems like we're a little bit attached to our suffering. And it makes us who we are. And we don't want to let it go. Whereas you would never see that in animals. And then I also, you mentioned choice now, and I think I read one of the books where you mentioned there was choice about holding on to fear, or something, I can't quite remember. But is there really choice there, or are we pre-programmed?
I just want to say about the animals and us. I think the important thing about the difference between us and other animals is that because we have the higher minds we have, and because they convince us so much of the reality of their thoughts, and because they are helpful to us in many ways, it's very easy for it to spill over into thinking, first of all, there's no avoiding that, but also into equating the stuff that leads to suffering with something that's ultimately important to our survival, so our sense of self and all that. Something in us says, we are higher, our minds are capable of more than other animals, and therefore we cannot possibly be the way the animals can be.
But I
But
think
we
sometimes
can.
we like to suffer.
Yes, I think that's exactly right, because that's how we get a sense of who we are. And we feel like if we let go of all that, we wouldn't somehow still exist.
Exactly.
And in the sense of and the animals don't wonder what they are. They don't, they're just worried about what they're doing right now. And we'd be better off if we did that too, but I think to see where we do get our sense of definition from holding on to the suffering is very illuminating and freeing if
We're
we're
very
brave
attached
about
to
it.
it.
Yeah, we don't want to let it go. The thing about non-duality and choice, I think when someone is identified with this as being who I am, and life is experienced as happening to me, or life is something that I do, there's separation everywhere. There is not a sense of continuity. There's very much a sense of self and other. To entertain the idea from that point of view that there's no such thing as choice, because everything is just occurring, it's all, just kind of things in motion, is just an idea in the head. So I think when the actual experience is of everything being on the same plane, that there is no self and other, then the whole question of choice becomes a very different kind of thing. It's not, there's no investment in it, it's preference, it's for fun, it's not got anything to do with keeping going this narrow sense of self. But from within the defined sense of a narrow self, to say, as non-duality teachers often do, there's no such thing as choice, it's just an idea. It's not experienced that way. So, to me, it's kind of a useless thought.
Yeah.
You either experience it that way or you don't. And if you don't, somebody can say it all day long, and
Right.
it's just an idea.
I had a question about, you mentioned the experience or the sense of being a person but not identifying with it. other people or watching it in myself is a challenge of how is it that, when we're in contact with that presence and being that attentive with what's happening, that we, like if I'm totally attentive to what's happening here, it seems like the challenge is there could be a sense of like insensitivity of things that aren't here, like my family, I'm not thinking about them, or I'm not, so, and I guess in relationships that can come up too. So the challenge just seems that, is there, because what I'm getting from you is that in non-identifying, there's still a deep aliveness, there's still a deep sensitivity. But I just find a challenge in that, because when we're not identified and we're not attached, how are we still deeply feeling sensitivity for others? How are we deeply connected to that?
Do you mean people that are actually in your presence? Or people that you're thinking that aren't here?
I think people who are looking at this and questioning and deeply present, when they're totally attentive to what's happening, they just forget about everything else and don't care about anyone else, and they don't think about them, and they don't. That's this challenge I'm seeing when you're that connected to what's happening.
But it's like, if there's someone in your life that you care very much about and have a relationship with and all that, if they're not here right now, in this actual literal moment, the only way they exist is as a thought right now. But that, just because that's true, doesn't mean that if they walked into the room, you would have any trouble at all engaging with them and feeling tenderness and aliveness with them. So it's like, it's just to see the difference. It's not that, we don't have to keep thinking about somebody when we're not with them in order to,
Care.
yeah, in order to know that we'll know what to do and how to be with them and feel for them when there's an actual encounter going on. Something in us thinks, you kind of have to keep the awareness of the person or the situation, you know, that just, if it's true somehow, whatever that means, we have to kind of keep the thought alive in our awareness all the time. And we don't. Do you know?
Yeah, I see what you're, because it seems like a living challenge, because I'm watching this happen, and I sense what you're saying, that if you're, just because when you're totally with this, or in some like Krishnamurti says, love is total attention, so in this, it doesn't mean that, right, when that person, just because you're not thinking about someone or you aren't remembering them, that there's somehow a lack of sensitivity. I think it's just challenging that, maybe challenging that
Just
conditioning.
see the difference between a thought and actual immediate life. Just see the difference between those two things. The ego wants to say, well, if it's a true thought, it's a thought about a situation that really is ongoing, somehow it's important or necessary to keep making reference to it, remembering it, or, to keep it happening. And that, that's, to see that functioning and realize that it is not necessary. In fact, it interferes with your ability to really be with what's happening right now. So, you just see it as, the mind wants to come in and remind you of something that's ongoing out there somewhere, but it's just a thought. When you stop thinking it, for all practical purposes, ceases to exist. But just right then, thought is not necessary to keep life going. But we think it is.
Earlier we all just sort of agreed to the idea that we love suffering or like suffering, and it strikes me that it's much more we're habituated to it or we're used to it. Can you say anything about that? If we actually like it or love it, or it's just the water we swim in?
We don't love that we suffer. I don't think we love that we suffer, unless we're really unhealthy, sort of psychologically. But what we're unwilling to see is the part that we play in it ourselves, that we actually cause it. And we're unwilling to see what we want is, we want the goodies of what causes us to suffer without the suffering. We want the sense of identity. We want you know, we wanna feel, it feels good to feel sorry for yourself, for instance. There's actually pleasure in that. We're unwilling to look at the fact that there's pleasure in it. We're unwilling to look at the fact that we enjoy getting revenge because somebody did us wrong. So, you know, I don't think it's that we enjoy suffering, we're unwilling to see how embedded it is with,
Right,
the
it's like
stuff-
two sides of the same thing, and
Yeah.
you like one side and then
yeah,
drag along the rest of it with it.
yeah, yeah. If we could still have all the identification without the suffering, we'd go for it in a heartbeat. But we're not willing to see that you can't have one without the other, you just can't. Yeah.
I think, I was listening to what she said over there, and I was thinking about, you know, sometimes we think that if we're in that space, that place, like when we meditate or whatever, and we're just being still, that somehow we're being selfish, right? Because we're not thinking about other people when we should be. But the truth is, I have found in my own experience, the more I'm there, the more this compassionate consciousness spreads out farther and farther, embraces everything, so that no one is excluded from that. Do you know what I mean? From that sense of me feeling in myself. I don't know how to explain that, but I guess maybe that doesn't speak to what she said, but I think that the more we go there, the more we include everyone in this odd way.
Yes, probably, and there's something outside looking at this phenomenon and saying, what's the right way to be, what's a good way to be? I mean, I think what you're saying probably actually does occur. I just think as a way of, we'll let it go. Oh, listen.
Where does forgiveness and letting go fit in here? In other words, are there some things that people just can't forgive, or is it that they don't want to forgive? I mean, you can't, that's a judgment about whether you just don't want to forgive. But the whole idea of letting it go, or forgiving and letting it go, and then moving on in the present time. Say something about that? You know, and I don't mean the fact that people used to say after horrible things happening to, or even little things, oh, you know, that's, you can't forget that, or, you know, I realize that people, there's a block to being able to forgive anybody for what has happened to you by them. But somewhere in here, the whole idea of moving on.
Yeah. The inability to move on comes of, I mean, the thing to see is that there's a reluctance to move on, there's an unwillingness to, there's something says, we have this, and this is in the culture a lot, something says it's necessary to forgive in order to be able to let go, or it's, you know, it's like there is this sort of deciding point, or this switch that's got to be flipped or something, and that's a setup. You know, it says, first of all, that it's necessary to forgive in order to be able to be free of whatever it was. It's the important thing to see is that it's made an issue. It's made into an issue for me. The question of whether I have forgiven or not, whether I'm going to be willing to, whether I'm ready to, whether I already have. It's like the very fact that I define it as a thing that has to happen before another thing can happen, that's the thing to pay attention to. It's like why is it that when somebody wakes up, they didn't first do a lot of forgiving, nor do they now say, now I can forgive everyone. It's a non-issue. That's really worth looking at. But even that, what I just said, it's just an idea. If it's not somebody's actual experience, it's useless. It's like, we were talking about the choice and non-duality. So, to me, the important thing is if I have a thing that I realize I haven't forgiven, then it's really important for me to pay attention to the quality of that. It's like how important it is to me. There's nothing that says should forgive, should not forgive, time to forgive. All of that is secondary. It's incidental. It's like, what is the force of the thing that makes this has such energy and heat in it
Yeah.
for me?
So looking at it in the present right now,
Yeah.
how I'm feeling about this right now,
Yeah. Or to be forgiven.
to be forgiven.
It's the same, very same thing. Something in us, when we know we've wronged somebody terribly, something in us that feels like we can't move on from it until we know that they have forgiven us. What a setup. What is the thing? What is it? The thing that I did, that I wronged, hurt somebody terribly. How does it look different in the light of simply looking at the fact that it happened? I did this. How does that change things? If the question of needing forgiveness is taken out of it altogether, it's simply a recognition. There's something about wanting to be forgiven that's trying to undo the past. It's trying to make it okay that it happened. It will never be okay that it happened. And somehow we can be free anyway.
So can you stay with this a little bit? I mean, what is the change of just observing it, observing the heat of it rather than looking for the forgiveness?
The thing about looking for forgiveness, there's some kind of there's some
Okay.
avoidance of the deep feeling.
Okay.
That's the thing. So setting all that aside and being willing to just feel the feeling, then whatever needs to happen from just feeling the feeling of having done the thing is finally allowed to happen. Because the mind isn't busy with telling you what you should do or what would solve it or something like that. All of that stuff that we do is a way to avoid feeling the profound sense of responsibility for having done this thing. Or seeing the damage of it or whatever. Non-judgmentally, to be able to do that, to recognize, I did this thing, and let the pain of it really hit you. And not have to hit you over and over and over again. But also not to go into that experience hoping that this will be the last time. Not as a setup, not as a means to an end. It's like the right thing. It's not our business what's going to happen in the future. It's just that if the thing's hitting me now, all there is for me to do is feel it, sob, whatever. Robert, did you want to say something?
I was just gonna add on to what this, where you said that when my personal experience has been when I'm in that more expanded state, I'm more apt to remember people's birthdays or be, more cognizant of not only my surrounding environment, but everything else than I would be if I was attached to my own ego and trying to think about them in my own egoic way.
Yeah, I think it's true because when we're in that spaciousness, the sense of being separate from other people, gets very soft. It's like, what do you know, we really are all the same. So the impulse to be kind and to enjoy somebody naturally comes because there isn't that rigid self and other thing going, like it usually is. I just want to, oh yeah, okay.
Just the word unity consciousness came to me, maybe in relation to what that young woman was saying about something that's not near, and am I still being sensitive to it? If we're all one, I don't understand unity consciousness really. Is that the same as spaciousness?
Oh, it's just words.
Really?
It's like when,
No, I get it.
yeah, okay, good. It's just blah, blah, blah.
I want to share something that happened to me tonight, just listening to you talk, because in the beginning you were talking about just accessing this place of spaciousness, and my mind was saying, oh, you can't do that, you never can do that, and then
as I was doing it, I just sort of felt it, you know, I could sort of feel, you know, just calming down and felt this little spaciousness, and then, bam, this thought came in. You didn't do this thing at work you were supposed to do. It's just like, you know, it was fascinating to me how I just jumped in. And you sent this email and you forgot to put the thing in the bottom, it's gonna be printed this way, and it's gonna be, you know, everything, all these horrible things are gonna happen, and blah, 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 and I was like, oh, God, I'm never doing this again, you know? But the beauty of it was that I just, so then I started thinking, okay, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna check and make sure what I actually said in that email, you know? And then I said, no, you know, I just sort of, I'm just gonna be with this, and so the rest of the evening, I've just sort of been here, it's kind of been blah, you know, I've been listening, and, but I just sort of like that moment, like you talk about, you know, there are those moments when you feel that spaciousness, and then the spaciousness was gone, you know, but I wasn't beating up on myself either, I was just sort of here, and I was feeling kind of tired, and I was feeling kind of, you know, and I was listening to people and say, well, I'll never get that way, but oh, maybe I will, you know, same old stuff, but I don't know, I guess what I want to say is it a setup, you know, to like I feel like I was setting myself up, like trying to reach that peace, trying to reach that expansiveness, whatever you're talking about. I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up, sort of what happened. And I'm also, you know, a little bit more at peace. I mean, I've been sitting here and saying, okay, so I feel, you know, and I'm kind of, it's not so bad, you know, it's just sort of, I figured maybe this is what spaciousness is, maybe this is what I'm supposed to feel. I mean, this is kind of what my mind, you know, is going through something.
Well, yeah, I mean, the important thing is what's happening,
Yeah,
not what we'd like to be happening.
yeah.
So if, you know, there's this constant measuring thing, this is occurring, and as soon as the awareness of what's occurring turns on, which is allegedly a good thing, the very next thing is, oh, but I wish this other thing that was happening a minute ago was happening now, or, do you know? So if whatever's happening is already happening, it's already happening. So if you can just simply allow to happen what's already happening, the spaciousness will make itself known, maybe, or it won't. But you don't do it as a way to get that to happen. It's like, you know, it comes in through the back door. If you look at it as something to go after, to pursue, forget it. So it's wonderful.
Going back to the subject of forgiveness and amends making, I want to get clear on what your message is about amends. And I have in my mind this idea, maybe that's the wrong thing just to begin with, right there, that making amends is a way to sort of go up the food chain of spiritual ladder, a way to develop more consciousness. But you indicated that it was a setup. I just want to get clarification. Is there any usefulness to making amends?
Yes, I think so. I think if it's a way of, so, I mean, a lot of what we do is what's really deeply going on is different from what it looks like on the surface. So I think when we make amends to someone, it's a thing that, it's a gesture that we make. It's a way of saying it to ourselves. It's like the person that we wronged is hearing it. There's a way of completing a process that's kind of owning or saying, it's just saying, yes, this is a fact. Yes, I did this. But it's not like a two-step thing. I think when we get into the, now that I've done this, now then I'll be okay after that kind of thing, that's the setup, I think. But sometimes we have to do something, especially if it has to do with something that went on in the past that was sort of missed at the time because we didn't own up to it then, whatever. I think sometimes taking this kind of outer step of making amends it's just a way of embodying, you know, it's giving ourselves a setup to feel the thing that we've needed to feel. There's something about saying it out loud and having a witness and, you know, all of that. So yes, I think there's a point to it. I just think sometimes we try to make it into more than, or we try to make it a necessity. It's completely possible to make amends without ever saying a word to the person that you wronged. but sometimes we need that outer thing. In a egoic kind of way, psychological kind of way. That's useful. Yes.
From the amends point, the polished story to the point about forgiveness as a setup, and the desire to just see things as they are and to feel the feeling. It seems like there's an implied purpose to avoiding the setups and feeling the feelings. And maybe, I think you've already said it, but I'm just gonna ask you to say it again. What would be the implied purpose of seeing things as they are?
Because that's all we've got. I mean, when, the reason we feel at a distance from ourselves, the reason we don't experience life as, from the point of view of awareness instead of ego, is that we're forever distancing ourselves from what is, whether what is in here or what we're observing, feeling, or, you know, whatever. So to the extent that we can not put a separation between awareness and what awareness perceives, we will know what we are. If there's a reason, that's the reason. And all we've got, all we ever have is what's occurring right now. Whether it's in the form of a memory or physical pain or, you know, even though it looks like it has something to do with the past, it's here now. So all of our pain comes of separating ourselves somehow from what is, what's already here, it's already happening.
Now, I've got that, I'm gonna feel that suffering, but I'm gonna feel that pain when I feel that pain, you know, when I don't try to avoid separation, you know? When I just try to go into it, what's the difference between that suffering and the other suffering?
Can you say it again? I didn't quite.
Yeah, I mean, this is the suffering I experience from separation when I create a story and attach myself to, identify with the pain that's been caused me, okay? The ego story. But also, if I eschew that and I'm just gonna go right into feeling what happened, that's painful too.
What happened right now, or what you're remembering?
Oh, good point, yeah, what I'm remembering, yeah.
I mean, when being absolutely conscious and absolutely willing to be in the moment sometimes is painful. So it's one thing to, it's just to see the difference between pain that's caused by revisiting a thought, a memory. It's still real pain, but you can see that it's secondary to thought, to memory. That's different from you stepping on a piece of glass and it hurts your foot, or you're witnessing terrible suffering right there in front of your eyes and you feel the pain of that. So, you know, you see what I mean? We can make ourselves hurt all the time, and we do. Anybody? Oh, yes.
This is making me think of something I was doing today, which, have you heard of EFT? It's a tapping program. And
no, I guess I haven't.
I got the video a long time ago, and I just happened to do it today. And it seems like it's exactly what you're talking about. So you start with tapping the side of your hand, and you say 3 times, and it can be absolutely anything. It can be a psychological issue, a physical issue, whatever, and you say, even though my foot is killing me, I completely and totally love myself. Even though my boss is treating me horribly, I completely and totally love myself. So you start out with that this acknowledging that this is happening, but it doesn't change how I feel about myself. And then you go through this tapping process, and you get into, like you were saying, you're getting into that feeling as though it's happening right now. So, you know, so you would start with, my boss is treating me terribly. I'm really angry about what my boss is doing. I really feel horrible about so then you tap these various parts, and then you breathe and release it. And what they're finding is that the kids, you know, especially kids, are able to release trauma very easily. that a lot of people are able to release pain in their bodies because the repression of those feelings are what are causing a lot of the pain, or the pain of the past. So it's like your question about what's the point of doing it, that instead of pushing it away, you're being, and the point, and the way you do it is to experience it as intensely as you can. So you really get into the anger, you really get into whatever's going on, and allowing it instead of fighting it.
Interesting.
They're finding that you're doing amazing.
So it's time for us to do whatever's next. So I guess we'll see some of you tomorrow, and we won't see some of you tomorrow, and